Members, good afternoon. We have a quorum. I call to order the meeting. The meeting will end at 5:30. If need be, I will extend the meeting by a maximum of 15 minutes. If you have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest in relation to the items being discussed today, please declare the nature of the relevant interest before you speak in accordance with paragraph 83A of the Rules of Procedure. And please also note the regulation in relation to voting in the case of direct pecuniary interest in accordance with Rule 84 of the Rules of Procedure. Regarding the agenda item today, the item invites members to approve the creation of a new commitment of $6 billion under Head 155 Government Secretariat, Innovation and Technology Commission Subhead 700 General Non-recurrent for the implementation of the Subsidy Programme for the setup of Life and Health Technology Research Institutes. The panel on Commerce, Industry, Innovation and Technology was consulted on the 20th of February 2024. We have with us a couple of officials to take questions from members. We have Professor Shen Dong, the Secretary, and his team. I will first invite Mr. Jeffrey Lam to report the discussion of the meeting on the 20th of February 2024. The floor is yours, please. On the 20th of February 2024, the panel on Commerce, Industry, Innovation and Technology discussed the relevant agenda item, that is the subsidy program to assist universities to set up life and health technology research institutes. Members in general support the program. The government has earmarked $6 billion in the budget 2023 to 24 to fund the relevant subsidy. Apart from subsidizing universities to set up the research institutes in order to enhance the basic research and development advantages in terms of life and health technology, members think that the subsidy program should focus on the commercialization of R&D outcomes, thus promoting the development of midstream and downstream. Member also asked about the IP benefit sharing arrangements and suggests that the government should receive reasonable returns based on IP benefits. Member also suggested to the administration that a mechanism be set up in order to ensure that the institute can cover the cost on their own without having received the full subsidy from the administration, that is to prevent disruption. Member also urges the administration should ensure objective assessment of applications and performance of the research institutes. The administration has already responded to members on their questions and concerns. That concludes my report. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey Lam. A total of 27 members have pressed a button to request to speak. They are Ms. Dari Lee, Dr. Tan Yuehang, Dr. Johnny Ng, Mr. Lam Chen Sing, Mr. Tang Fei, Rock Chan, Brave Chan, Kitson Yang, Ms. Connie Lam, Mr. Yim Kong, Shanghai Long, Professor William Wong, Mr. Chen Xiu Hong, Lee Chen Kang, Dennis Leung, Chen Pui Leung, Ma Fong Kwok, Michael Tian, Ben Chen, Dr. Su Cheng Weng, Dr. Hui Simon Lee, Mr. Tung Li Tse, Dr. Wendy Hong, Professor Priscilla Leung, Mr. Edmund Wong, Dominic Lee, and Ms. Eunice Yong. First member, Ms. Dari Lee. The first time she got the first to speak. Thank you, Chairman. I support the relevant fund. We need to continue to support technology and life and health technology development. As in this era, developments take place very fast. We have a lot of top-notch universities and R&D talents in Hong Kong. So how can we commercialize life and health research incomes and make them practicable? This is definitely a competitive industry, but the funding involved is not a small amount. It's $6 billion. In 24 to 25 and 28 to 29, the administration has provided the financial implications and estimated cash flow in these financial years. I'd like the funding to be mainly spent on the R&D as well as the commercialization of R&D outcomes. But after all, I understand that administrative expenses are involved in the research institute. Next, on KPI, I understand the ITIB has been seeking funding for a couple of times, but we also need to be a gatekeeper of public funds. Can you tell us how you will report to the council and you will report to the public? We have high hopes. The funding is not a small amount. Apart from this item, as I said, can the Secretary undertake that you will report to the Council from time to time in relation to the funding applications you have already lodged? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for your support. For the first two questions, that is the KPI and the proportion, I'd like to invite Deputy Secretary to take these questions. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. On the breakdown of cash flow, in the document, we have already set out 2024 to 25 to 2027 to 28. However, for 2028 to 29 and beyond, that's a lump sum figure. We estimate that upon the setup of the research institute, it will require quite a large amount of capital to support their development, after which they will enter a stage of stabilized development. When we obtain funding today, we will also require universities to submit applications. They will have to make a full account on the funding or capital use. So the estimated cash flow is a set of ballpark figures. We will report to the Council in relation to the operation of the research institutes. As we mentioned in the papers, we estimate that the research institutes will have their own board of directors. The main university or institute will also have to send a representative to the board of directors or the research institute to monitor closely the operation of the institute. We will also set up a secretariat to ask for an annual report, annual audit report, and before funding is dispersed, we will conduct auditing to make sure the research institute has fulfilled the responsibilities and met the milestones they have undertaken at the time of the application. Secretary, please. On the third question, let me take a macro perspective. Over the last 2 years, the current term government has planned quite delicately for the INT development. We have high hopes on Hong Kong developing into an international INT center. We didn't start from scratch for all aspects, but then for some aspects, we did start from scratch. So from upstream, downstream, midstream, and the collaboration among the industry, academic, and research sector, we are working hard on these fronts. We reached 1% last year, which is quite a good situation. Every year, we will report the project's items to the Legislative Council. Once again, I thank members for your support. Dr. Tan Yuehang. Thank you, Chairman. I support the setup on the Life and Health Technology Research Institute. I have a couple of questions. One, at first sight, it seems that Hong Kong needs to set up a Life and Health Technology Research Institute, but it is actually more than one, 2 to 3. In the information papers, It is said no more than 3. However, why don't we focus our energy and resources on developing one life and health technology research institute? What kind of factors are at play? Do you need to tailor-make one institute? $6 billion will have to be dispersed in tranches. $1.8 billion in the first 2 years. Do you have any expected results or outcomes when you are going to disperse $1.8 billion for the second time? Will you make any assessment of the previous stage? My third question is that the government is going to earmark $16 billion for life and health technology, but I don't think this is to stop. There will also be market participation, market force, etc. Do you think the amount of $6 billion can attract participation from the private sector? Secretary, thank you, Dr. Tan, for your question. Our target is 1 to 3 research institutes, no more than 3. Ultimately, there could be 3. The reason why there is no target set in stone is that 8 universities will have to submit proposals. There will be 3 institutes tops. We need to make sure universities will have to collaborate with one another in order to set up institutes. Regarding $1.8 billion being dispersed in tranches, the administration has all along been sponsoring or funding different schemes of a large scale in tranches. Organizations or institutes will have to submit annual reports. So the administration has been exercising control and monitoring of institutes. However, disbursements will have to be made in tranches. On the other hand, we do have KPI. For example, we have collaboration in the upstream, number of research projects, talents, scholars who are top-notch, patent situation, any patent income, any income from the private sector, sponsoring or funding from the industry or industrial sector. In different stages, the focus points are different. In the upstream, we focus on breakthroughs of developments. In the downstream and midstream, we focus on the commercialization of R&D outcomes. Next, this subsidy program is the most important in the I&T landscape, that is upstream. $6 billion are used to cementing the basic R&D strengths and advantages in the upstream. But then we also need to commercialize the R&D outcomes in the midstream and downstream in order to realize the value of the upstream work. So there will be relevant measures and facilities in the midstream and downstream to support the work in the upstream. Regarding the industries in the downstream, we have already identified a couple of core areas. Life and health technology ranks the first. Thank you. Next, Dr. Johnny Ng. Thank you, Chairman. I also support the setup on the Life and Health Technology Research Institutes. The government would like to ask for $16 billion, and it is actually not a large amount of money in terms of advanced technology. In paragraph 17 of the information papers, it mentions the ratio of R&D work, 70%. How did you arrive at this figure? If we need to commercialize the R&D outcomes, will this actually tie our hands? Will this impose restrictions on us? Next, Hong Kong has quite a lot of upstream, downstream, and midstream development, say in Hong Kong. It's running quite well. They partnered with eminent professors or universities in other countries. There are also such projects under Hong Kong. So how can we make sure that the funding will not be duplicated? You mentioned there could not be duplicate applications, but how will the government know whether these applications are repeating one another? Do you have the exact names of these scholars and universities? How can we avoid public funds from going down the drain?
Yeah. The last question in paragraph 23, you have presented more strategies such as international cooperation and so on. So will there be consideration of IP transfer, and could you provide some statistics? So 3 questions. First of all, I have to thank the legislator for his question regarding IP. It belongs to the Institute, and the revenue arising from the IP, they're not less than 70%, and being contributed to the Institute. So we have announced some new initiatives, and that is also in line with our current practice. So the 70%, 30% ratio, it's an improvement, because in the past, 70% would belong to the university and 30% to the team. So that would create an incentive for technology transfer. So in recent years, ever since we had the Innovation Technology Bureau, and we have global cooperation, and the situation in Hong Kong, they focus more on local universities and international cooperation, and they focus on R&D. And we have 2 areas, life sciences and AI. The subsidies amount to a few $100 million a year, and it can't compare with our current initiative. So we want to consolidate our advantages in the life sciences, because in the past it was rather diverse. Another issue is, through a focused approach, we want the research in Hong Kong to achieve some breakthroughs. So we have made reference to a successful experience overseas and in the mainland, and we want to achieve critical mass and allow some breakthroughs in critical areas. But Hong Kong has a different approach. They are in the downstream, whereas our current initiative focuses on the upstream. In recent years, SAR government has been focusing on technology transfer, and we are very encouraged to see that the local universities in innovation, they have made some improvements, and our technology transfer has received a lot of support from the government, and we have made a lot of progress. And recently we had made some announcements. The response was very favorable, and we're now in the second phase. So the downstream products are also being promoted, so we want to see a more synergistic effect, and thank you for your support. Another question has not been answered. The question was how you could ensure the funding. I'll have my colleague take up the question. Each project, when they receive an application, they have to submit a proposal, and they will list the personnel involved. So there is some safeguarding there. At the very least, we will see whether there's any overlap and how the division of labor is achieved, so that we do have some safeguarding function. Next, Mr. Lam Zhensing. Now, the FC in every Friday, it seems to have a theme of innovation technology, and next week, Dr. Sun is also scheduled to meet with us. We have projects ranging from 10 billion to some 2 billion, and these are in microelectronics. So in the past, Dr. Sun had said that R&D makes up 1% of our GDP. So we hope that through these measures, our R&D should make up a bigger percentage of GDP to reflect their contribution to our economy. In the past, the R&D would take a long time before we see any return on investment, so that led to difficulty in investment. So government support is needed, but these projects, if they are not successful, the public might feel that this is money wasted. Or would there be any other returns? And as the document says, if performance is not as well as expected, the government has the right to stop the investment or suspend the investment. So under what conditions would you think that the performance is not as expected? So when you deal with applications, there is a scope. The scope is life sciences and health and so on. But in paragraph 9, you have mentioned gene therapy, cell therapy, pharmaceuticals, and but technology develops very rapidly. When they receive these subsidies, and in 3-4 years' time, there might be other potential areas that are worthy of investigation. So is there any room for fine-tuning? Can they conduct R&D in other areas as long as it's still within the scope of life sciences? So 2 questions. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for your question. I'd like my colleague to take up the question. Mr. Lam, you mentioned that we are conducting upstream R&D. Some might be more successful, some might not see immediate results. So the question was, even if the project is not successful, well, I feel in the R&D process, we have cultivated a team. So through this scheme, we estimate that there would be a lot of post-grad R&D vacancies created, job opportunities created. Now, in the future, how do we evaluate these institutes' performance? Well, each institute would have a board of directors to monitor their work, and we anticipate that there would be an independent scientific team where the relevant experts would conduct peer review, and they would also need to submit a report to the Innovation Technology Bureau. So they would examine the different KPIs, their upcoming plans, and so on. So our steering committee would also participate. So we will also invite domestic and overseas experts to conduct peer review. And lastly, in the 10-year period, if the institutes wish to fine-tune their R&D, I hope there would be an interactive process. They can explain why they need to fine-tune, and when they receive the steering committee's approval, we will consider their application. Mr. Dang Fei, my first question is that the budget is 6 billion. How do you calculate this figure? It's quite a substantial sum. Compared to the mainland, it's more or less on the same level, but you compare it to the U.S. NIH, in 2023, they have a budget of 50 billion. So how did you come up with this figure? Well, if you look at Hong Kong custom, there are 9 areas. There's pharmaceutical, medical equipment, TCM, supplements, and gene therapy, and so on. AI. So these are the 9 major areas in Hong Kong. So setting up this institute, is there a particular focus? If it already exists in Hong Kong, there's no need to duplicate. Now, unless we're able to headhunt overseas, some talent from overseas, unless there's a special advantage, I don't think 6 billion is enough. So what mechanism do we have to decide that there is a dominant area of R&D? So 2 questions. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Dang Fei. Regarding the 6 billion figure, previously the FC had set aside some 10 billion for developing life sciences, and we have proposed setting up a budget of 6 billion dedicated for life sciences. And as compared to the US, it's not a lot, but what strengths does Hong Kong have? The majority of the funds will be used in R&D, so administrative expenses are very minimal compared to overseas. That is very different. Hong Kong, as a matter of fact, the funding efficiency is very high, so we're confident that the 6 billion invested, Hong Kong will see some significant returns in the coming years. Now, regarding the direction, we're not focusing on something new. We're focusing on our strengths, our advantages. In life sciences, we do have an advantage in Hong Kong, but how do we achieve a global status? Well, we need to consolidate, we need to identify some directions where we can achieve a pole position. Hong Kong U has some small projects, but we want to achieve a critical mass. So that's why we can have 1 or 3 institutes. We want the universities to decide where their strengths and advantages are. Thank you, Mr. Tang. Mr. Rock Chen, now I support this subsidy, but I do want to seek some clarification. Now, our local universities will be subsidized to achieve cross-field or cross-dimension cooperation. So aside from subsidizing the universities, will you consider subsidizing non-university partners such as life science incubation firms, or even some unicorn firms? Now, we are aware that life sciences R&D, if you want results, typically they take a long time, and you would need to invest a large amount. So this scenario would arise when they receive government funding. They have good progress initially. They can meet our milestones, but because it stretches over a long time and it needs a lot of money, the government funding will be exhausted. So will the government consider, aside from the 6 billion, the government could set aside some money, so when the scenario I described arises, they are progressing along the milestones that were established. So when the government assesses them and feels that they need to be further subsidized, there would be money set aside at an earlier time to continue to support these research items.
Thank you. 2 questions. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Rock Chen, for your support. The Research Institute will be led by 1 or more of the 8 universities in Hong Kong, but we also welcome startups or partners to join this scheme. because downstream participation can drive upstream development. We keep our mind open. Right, life and health technology takes a long time before we can see results. Some start off quite well, but then they lack capital when they go on. We want to see better results. So we've been working in the past. So we want to help strong institutes to become even stronger. We can help them achieve breakthroughs to further develop. The target is that in 2 or 3 areas, Hong Kong will achieve breakthroughs. This is our principal goal. I believe there will be more support from the sector. From university laboratories to the industry to the development of products, the income streams or source will be different. Mr. Brave Chan. Thank you, Chairman. I support this project. President Xi Jinping mentions the 8 centers in Hong Kong, highlighting the International I&T Center. We should support any project that can further develop the International I&T Center initiative. Regarding the sharing of benefits, that is no less than 70%. Is that actually the international standard? Can it be higher, even 80% or 90%? The local demand will still be keen. There will also be keen interest in the community. So are we being too conservative when we keep the benefits at no less than 70%? For the total funding amount of $6 billion, do you foresee that you will come back to the Council again for an increase in the amount? The first question, the Secretary may need to draw comparisons. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Brave Chan, for your support. This ratio was actually proposed by the administration. We have drawn reference from overseas experience. We are confident that in the foreseeable future, it will remain competitive. That is no less than 70% of the IP benefits and no more than 30% for universities in Hong Kong. Some universities in Hong Kong are even more aggressive. Their share is way lower than 30%. This gives universities the latitude to decide on the proportion or ratio. We believe this figure will be competitive. So we will come back to the Council again to ask for an increase in the funding amount. Well, there's no plan right now. It will be too long in the future for me to tell you. We hope that we can generate income. When the research institute is going on very well, and if we need to up the ante in the future, this will be something in the future. It's not something that I can tell right now, but I look forward to it as well. Mr. Kissen Yang. Thank you, Chairman. Life and health technology is a frontier field. It has a large market share. I definitely support using $6 billion to set up Life and Health Technology Research Institute. But if you need to compete with others, $6 billion is not enough. So is it possible that we can enhance our R&D capabilities with an increase in the funding amount? According to the papers, the funding amount has a ratio of 4:1. So can we attract more private enterprises to make investments? Can universities strive for more investments from the private sector so the ratio will rise to 5:1 instead of 4:1? When there is input from both the government and the private sector, this will incentivize the university to go on or to go even further, and the burden on the government is even reduced. One of the industries you research into is cell and gene therapy. I talked to the relevant organizations on cell and gene therapy. Do we need to align with international law as well? For example, blood is pivotal in cell and gene therapy. For example, you can transport blood from the mainland to Hong Kong, but then when you need to send it back to the mainland, in the industrial research and development, we also need to factor in legal support. For example, if the laws of Hong Kong cannot support industrial development, that will get us nowhere. We also need to look at the legal aspect, whether it can support the industrial development, so that our industry can go even further in the future. Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Kissen-Yang, for your support. For your first question, 4.1, 20% of matching is done by the university. We have already taken into account a basket of factors, consulted different parties. We arrived at this figure after consultation. It's not easy to ask universities to spend a large amount of money. We have already conducted consultation sessions. Afterwards, we found that this figure is a balanced one. We have already taken into account different factors. Market participation, industrial participation, these are some of the criteria in the assessment. Your second question is very good. On cell and gene therapy, as you mentioned, these are possible areas. There are two main reasons. One, it shows the international research trend. We need to make breakthroughs in this area. We have quite strong capabilities. So we include cell and gene therapy as one of the examples. That's why we put it in the papers. The industry of cell and gene therapy in the mainland ran into difficulties over the last year or so. We have been asking the mainland to allow Hong Kongers to set up businesses in this area with capital from Hong Kong people. The government will continue to follow up on this. I thank members for your support once again. Ms. Connie Lam. Thank you, Chairman. I speak in support of the project. I'd like to ask about the amount of $6 billion. It includes commercialization of R&D outcomes, I&T ecological chain with upstream, midstream, and downstream activities, as well as industrialization or industrial development. I understand developing new technologies does not guarantee success, and it does take time. But the scheme only sponsors projects for a maximum of 10 years. There will be results. So do you have any targets in this connection? Next, will you set up any mechanism for the transfer of knowledge and technology so that we can turn knowledge into practice. We previously went to the science park for genome project. It was subsidized by the government. But we can see that genome sequencing has a huge impact on rare diseases as well as hereditary diseases. Do you have any examples? Do you have any examples that you can share with us? Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Connie Lam, for your support. Thank you, Chairman. About the KPIs, we have included such KPIs in the information papers. That's about the transformation and commercialization of R&D outcomes, including the number of IP, patent, IP benefits, revenue from the private sector, sponsor from the industry, as well as the scale, number of startups and the investments they receive. All these are related to industrial development. They may target research and development in the upstream, but we have already added other KPIs about the commercialization of R&D outcomes. We fully agree with Ms. Connie Lam. Good R&D outcomes will stand us in good stead. Life and health technology life cycle may be longer, but we have already been encouraging different institutes to work on these projects. For local R&D, outcomes in advanced therapy or pharmaceuticals, we hope these can be applied in Hong Kong. We hope the clinical data are acceptable worldwide. We have these advantages. So we do want to conduct clinical trials in Hong Kong if the situation allows. For example, we have in the Hetao, Shenzhen, Hong Kong Science and Technology Innovation Cooperation Zone, there's a GBA International Clinical Trial Institute. Well, member asked you about any examples, any concrete examples. For example, as I mentioned, genome sequencing can help prevent hereditary diseases. So can you give us concrete examples to let us know more about the situation right now? Indeed, we have achieved some results. Professor Low from the CUHK looked into genetic therapy or genetic diagnosis. The research was on pregnant women. University team is also looking into vaccines or the Race Plus scheme. We can transform and commercialize R&D outcomes. Professor Yip from the UST Hong Kong also took part in the development of medicines. We will step up our efforts in the transformation and commercialization of R&D outcomes. Mr. Yim Kong. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask the Secretary 3 questions. First of all, I support the the funding scheme. One, on the eligibility of application. In paragraph 8, it sets out that an applicant institution must be a local university funded by the University Grants Committee, UGC. For joint applications, other institutes cover a wide scope. Do you limit it to commercial organizations or any scientific organizations?
Regarding international cooperation in paragraph 10, it says that it must comprise multidisciplinary cooperation and international collaboration. So are they just visiting Hong Kong a few days, or do they need to apply for a short-term work visa, or do they need to stay for a certain amount of time? So having just a 2-3 day visit, is that can that be considered eligible? And the next question regarding paragraph 10, a 4-to-1 ratio and other non-monetary subsidies. The paper says that the university and partner, they need to have at least one half of it not being material subsidy. So are you referring to donations or non-cash support? So the question is, if the applicant seeks some IP or provides IP, could they be quantified as, is that a non-material support or non-cash support? 3 questions. Thank you, Mr. Yan. I'd like my colleague, Ms. Cheng, to respond. Regarding the first question in paragraph 8, where the university and other institutions, we did not clarify that because the subsidy scheme on this occasion, we require a multidisciplinary, multi-university cooperation. So as long as these partners, when they submit the application, they can demonstrate to the government and steering committee that they have this ability to participate, to conduct R&D in certain areas, we will accept that application. The second question was, our goal is to invite respected academics or well-known scientists to participate. So the application needs to demonstrate that they have some substantive contributions, and the research needs to be substantial. So it's not just so the next question is about the subsidy distribution or the funding ratios, matching ratios. Now, if you're referring to IP, it is not included in the material contribution. Mr. Sang Hailong, I support the Life Science Institute proposal. I have some questions. In paragraph 15, it says that rent will not be provided, and the university or institute, they need to receive 20% funding. So if there is a $500 subsidy, they need to come up with $100, and that has to be cash. And there's also other contributions allowed. So assuming the university uses their own premises, so who will be assessing the value of those premises? And second question is about paragraph 11. It says that if the funding is not used in life sciences, the government can recover this subsidy. Does that mean there will be a lawsuit? They have to return this funding? Will the government sue the university? And third question is paragraph 19A. I see in 19A the scientist or researcher, they have to be from outside Hong Kong, and the standing and reputation has to be, they have to be reputable. Now, if that is the case, then we are talking about brand names or even Nobel laureates, that they would have a higher success rate in the application. So if 70% of the IP will be delegated to the team, so how do we ensure that our R&D results will be protected? We want it to be, we want the technology transfer to benefit Hong Kong. So how will the government ensure that, since we're inviting brand well-known scientists? Because we also want to safeguard our local interests. Thank you, Mr. Sang. I think Ms. Chen can take up the first two questions. Thank you, Chairman. Regarding paragraph 15, we will not provide any rental subsidies. That's because, as we said previously, the funding ratio is 4-1. The universities, they will have to seek some of their funding from outside partners, and the government ratio should not be used to pay rent, because we want the government funds, the majority of the funds should be used in R&D, not for other purposes. Now, if the applicant, whether they are on campus or whether they have found other premises, we can calculate some of the subsidies from the private sector subsidy. So if we find that some of the funding is not used on R&D, we can recover those funds. The design of this scheme, it's because we've set aside a large amount, and we also expect the funds to be released in phases. We won't release the funds in one big sum. So the Research Institute, they need to work with the steering committee and submit some plans and milestones. So they need to complete certain items before they get the next phase of funding. And in the interim period, they need to submit reports to the government. We also give the universities a responsibility where they have to audit the books. So then we believe if the institute runs into difficulties or problems, the government should have sufficient room to prevent the waste of public funds. So does that mean that we cannot recover funds? It just means that they won't receive funding in the next phase. Ms. Cheng, could you confirm that? I think this is research. If they've already spent the resources and ultimately it might not succeed, or if there are undesired outcomes, I think we can accept that the resources have been spent. There's another question that has not been answered. You can follow up your other question. The technology transfer. This is a research item. They have to submit progress reports. There's an audit every year, and the institute needs to disclose papers and research findings and so on. So the process is closely monitored, and if they cannot proceed for various reasons, and you want to recover the resources, I think that's difficult because they've already committed themselves. Now, we are aware that the IP belongs to the institute. It's just that the return on the IP, not less than 70% belongs to the Research Institute. And if we have overseas scientists and researchers involved, we encourage that. It doesn't mean that they will receive the benefits of the IP. Typically, it is a large team, And if the scientists and researchers are willing to invest their time, I believe that is also normal. And because the IP belongs to the institute, and our Hong Kong's interests are protected. Professor William Wong, in 2022, we had put forward our innovation technology blueprint. So I'm encouraged to see that we are making progress. We want to set up this research institute. We've had plans being implemented, including the Inno Hong Kong scheme, where the scientists and their network worked on projects. We also have projects that were implemented, and on this occasion, the Life Science Institute, our medical schools have a lot of good research projects, so I support this scheme. But I do want to highlight that we want to promote life sciences and the physical sciences. The research life cycle is very different. In the physics sector, it might be 3 or 4 years. In life sciences, they could run for a decade or two. So a lot of colleagues mentioned KPIs. We need to keep a close eye on those. And a lot of projects, they need a lot of time. So how do we monitor these projects? I'm concerned that large projects, does the government have the experienced staff to handle that? For example, IP management, we need dedicated personnel. Concerned, will the government have to spend extra resources on developing that team? Thank you, Mr. Wong. First of all, as far as I understand, within the government, especially the Innovation Technology Bureau, we have high quality staff, but it doesn't mean that just having that can ensure success. We have to rely on the universities because they are a statutory body subsidized by the government. They have the resources and motivation. So that's why we set up the institute with the universities. We also, let's say, for example, in the U.S., MIT, Harvard, Brown University, there are universities, and we have 5 medical schools, and they conduct research on specific diseases and so on. In the mainland, we have TCM universities, and it's the same with Singapore. They have a lot of national research centers. They have to rely on the universities to manage these projects. In Singapore, they have a national research center. These are good examples, and Hong Kong needs to make reference to these examples. We have to rely on reputable schools and work on these projects. Mr. Wong, I'm aware that there are these arrangements, but the government is funding these projects. I think we need to keep a close eye on KPIs. It's not just a matter of auditing. We need to have, for example, IP management, and another. I need to declare interest that I'm a professor at CU. Mr. Wong, Dr. Wong wants to highlight that he has sufficient staff. Well, Hong Kong has the talent and resources to do a good job and management of this project, and I'm confident. As a matter of fact, this is a new approach. The government has direct management. For example, LegCo had approved a research center. And on this occasion, the life sciences, it's a new approach. We have the involvement of the universities and their resources committed.
Next, Mr. Chen Siu-hong. Thank you, Chairman. The commitment of $6 billion to fund local universities to set up life and health technology research institutes to foster cross-university, institutional, and multidisciplinary cooperation to support the research and development of life and health technology. I'm all out for it. In order to solidify the strategic strengths in this area, we cannot afford to lag behind. The funding program is basically based on institution as an application unit, so there could be 3 research institutes in total. The plus is that universities can give full play to their own strengths and special features so that they can redeploy resources flexibly. They can also factor in their research and development needs, but this can cause resources not being centralized enough. This can also cause resource silos, so to speak. Scientists, scholars, they are competent for conducting research, but they are no expert in governance structure and so on. For example, in upstream research and development, midstream commercialization, and downstream driving the industry development, these are all different. Regarding the use of resources, there are strict regulations. Instead of allowing universities to set up companies to engage their own staff, will this method result in duplication of resources? I'd like to ask the administration, have you considered setting up an independent or standalone institute which can drive the synergistic development of different universities? As the Secretary said, can we use a more innovative method to develop life and health technology? Have we drawn reference from overseas jurisdictions? 2 questions. Secretary, please. In my answer to Professor William Wong's question, I mentioned neighboring districts. They have successful examples. When the government does not step in, that is, we do not set up a standalone institute, that is exactly because we do not want to have duplication of resources. We want to allow universities to get things started. This can allow us to save administrative costs dramatically. As the Deputy Secretary said, the amount of $6 billion is mainly spent on research and development. Universities form larger-scale institutes. These are the common trend in Hong Kong. Our requirement is at least one university. It needs to work on research and development. It can make an application as well, but then it does not have any advantage in their application. That's why we encourage universities to seek partnership opportunities. We want to see different focus points of different applications. So if we have 3 institutes, then we have 3 main areas of research. We do have talents at university, but the point is that we need policies. We need targeted policies. Owing to a lack of resources, we only accepted 94 applicants in another application or program. I believe professors and the teaching staff can give full play to their own strengths. I hope research institutes will work closely with the industry. They can join research institutes, and they can also take part in the transformation of R&D outcomes or even the steps after that. We'll come back to the Council to report every year, so all of us can monitor the situation and can help research institutes to develop well. Regarding Inno Hong Kong, they set up one single platform spearheaded by the UST. Do you think there are issues with this method and that's why you switched to another method with the Life and Health Technology Research Institute? Well, Inno Hong Kong is developing very well. There are no issues whatsoever. There are 20-odd research centers. They are project-based. They conduct topical research. There are a total of 29 right now with good progress. We're talking about a Hong Kong-based research institute. It is a large-scale institute. There will be 1 to 3 main areas of research depending on the strength of Hong Kong and the trending research interests around the world. That's how we can achieve breakthroughs. Life and health technology has a wide coverage. We can only focus on the areas in which Hong Kong has strengths. Next, Mr. Lee Chen-kung. Thank you, Chairman. Whether the mainland Hong Kong or other countries also have an aging population. All around the world, we want to develop life and health technology well. So whether the young and old can also lead a happy life, and as well as a healthy life. My question is whether $6 billion is sufficient. In other countries, life and health and technology research takes a very long time. Some drugs may be developed to treat heart diseases, but then there are also other effects that can help other diseases. For example, Viagra is another example. We should give institutes freedom. So how should we allow them to have room to develop their own research? It takes talents and so on. Hong Kong is a good place to bring together mainland talents as well as Western talents. So I believe this research institute will be successful. A decade, is that enough? We oftentimes have to commercialize R&D outcomes and marketize R&D outcomes at university. We can see competition. We can see competition among universities. So how can we encourage universities to combine different programs, different courses? Local universities have courses co-offered by local universities and mainland or universities in the West. So are you going to put in place any joint venture programs? I hope we can also cover traditional Chinese medicine hospital as well. Actually, the concept of preventive treatment of diseases and health maintenance products are very important. For the second and third questions, they are asked the first time. Probably the Secretary can focus on these questions. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Is $6 billion sufficient? Well, given the current situation in Hong Kong, the administration has already gone all out to earmark $6 billion. We don't start from scratch. That's not the case. In the relevant areas, the administration has made investments or input in these areas. The results have been quite good. Right now, we're going to up the ante and we're going to earmark $6 billion to help them achieve even more breakthroughs, to help them further develop. I believe universities have the resources to develop the projects well. For the project, we want to bring together the strengths and capabilities of different universities in Hong Kong. Honestly, there has been cooperation among universities in Hong Kong, but we think we need to further strengthen the collaboration among different universities. We want to promote a collaborative culture among universities. Next, on traditional Chinese medicine, the administration adopts an open-minded attitude. We need to see the research areas of the applications submitted by different universities. I once again thank members for your support. Next, Mr. Dennis Leung. Thank you, Chairman. I support the setup of a Life and Health Technology Research Institute. That can help us achieve breakthroughs. I asked quite a lot about the intellectual property aspect, IP. IP benefits of no less than 70% will be given to research teams or inventors. Will the government hold, for example, 5% on the IP right or copyright? We care a lot about the use of public funds. When the R&D outcomes are successful and when they are commercialized, will you plow back the 5% of the benefits for the further future development of life and health technology that can make it sustainable? In the last panel meeting, I also asked similar questions and expressed my own views. I'd like to see if the administration has any more responses. There are 4 main areas in paragraph 13 of the information papers. The venues are provided by universities or institutes, but for fitting out, renovation, or upgrade, they can apply for a setup cost. Is there any ceiling to cap the funding amount in order that the funding amount applied will be dedicated to the research and development or the scholars or researchers? Secretary, thank you, Mr. Dennis Leung, for your support. For the second question, I'd like to ask Mr. Ivan Lee to take the question. Regarding IP, I understand the concerns of Mr. Dennis Leung. I'd like to emphasize IP belongs to the Research Institute. It is linked with universities, which are public organizations backed by the government, so it's still well within the scope of stakeholders in Hong Kong. In upstream basic R&D research, usually the administration gives the benefits to universities instead of taking the benefits itself. The administration wants universities to spend the amount on talent grooming, on further development of the project in this is our starting point. That's what we think. I completely understand members' concern. We have different projects which will be rolled out later. There will be investment schemes by the administration. there will also be returns. Mr. Ivan Lee, please.
Just now, paragraph 13D was referred to, the setup costs and renovation. Is there a ceiling or cap? Put simply, we don't have a fixed sum, but we will look at the proposal. For example, if the university takes a teaching facility and renovate it, and if they need to procure lab equipment, if it is reasonable, if it's related to R&D, we will support it. So it will have to depend on each application. Mr. Chan Pui Lang, I support the subsidy, the Life Science Institute subsidy plan. I have some questions. We know that the Northern Metropolis, they are focusing on life science research. So the enterprises that we wish to attract are related to this area. And in the future, these research projects, could we consider some synergistic arrangements with the Northern Metropolis such that there won't be any overlapping of our subsidies? So that's the first question. Second question, regarding paragraph 13, the financial arrangements will cover 4 main areas: operating costs, purchase of equipment, R&D associated costs, and one-off renovation. So in items C and D, is there any ratio restriction that would lead to most of the funding related to R&D? The third question is about administrative expenses. There will be a secretariat to deal with the administrative issues, and the government has said that they have set aside a budget to deal with it. But this is a decades-long expense. So have you estimated how much money would be spent per year? 3 questions. So first of all, I have to thank Mr. Chan for his support. So I'll set aside some questions for my colleagues. And now, as a matter of fact, life sciences, whether it is research or technology transfer commercialization, for example, in the Loop area, we are doing some planning research. So the Loop area will be conducting high-level international research, and life sciences will be one of the foci. We also have a national level laboratory planned. So the setting up of a life science institute, they might be located in the Loop and have further collaboration with the mainland. So there is a lot of room for development in that area. So I'll have my colleague take up the next 2 questions. I'll handle the third question. The question was about a secretariat to deal with administrative issues. So there will be 5 posts in the secretariat to deal with the anticipated workload, and we anticipate 5.9 million being spent per year, and this would mostly be salaries for the 5 staff. And in paragraph 13, you referred to the different funding areas and whether there would be any ratio. So our guiding principle is that the 6 billion for the institute, the majority of the expenses should be related to R&D, including their procurement of lab equipment, consumables related to R&D, or associated costs. We don't have a fixed ratio, but in the past, if you look at Hong Kong experience, the majority of the expenses are related to R&D. So there might be some 10% related to administrative expenses. So we will conduct auditing to make sure the money is well spent. Okay. Mr. Ma Fung Gok. The Life and Science Institute, I will support this in principle because it is very important to the development of innovation technology. Just now, the Secretary referred to university cooperation, and that is also one of the main thrusts. But according to paragraph 10, they need to meet 4 criteria. There has to be interdisciplinary cooperation, international cooperation. So we have local cooperation, overseas cooperation. Is that a conflict? Or will we be focusing more on overseas cooperation? In 2016, there was a national plan that there's a national goal of for 2030. So it's not just limited to medical health. Just now there was a question raised regarding TCM. So TCM has received a lot of attention, especially after COVID. So I want to ask this institute, the Life Sciences Institute, will there be more of a focus on TCM pharmaceutical because there is a very large demand? Will there be a consideration in that area? And the institute, now, different universities will have different projects in the future. If the universities want to cooperate, then will they take existing projects and in order to meet these demands, will they invest or inject their old projects into this scheme? So will there be some overlap? Will they be investing their old projects, and will there be overlapping of resources? So these are the few questions I wish to ask. Okay, the university cooperation, second question TCM, and third, existing projects being injected. Will there be an overlap? Thank you, Mr. Ma, for the question. I want to emphasize that international cooperation and local cooperation are not in conflict. Our consideration is Hong Kong's existing life science research should be consolidated, and there might be some consolidation that would occur. So the main thrust, but each institute will have to have international collaboration. So we encourage international cooperation and domestic cooperation. And when we assess their work, if one university makes an application and it will definitely have a lower weighting compared to a application that has international collaboration. So put simply, we want to have a more consolidation. And the second question was about TCM. Just now I mentioned each university, in their proposals, they can make applications. So in life sciences spectrum, it is very wide. It includes engineer, it includes basic research, it includes new material, pharmaceuticals, and so on. It's a very wide spectrum, and TCM is a part of the medical system. So I believe in the proposals, there will be TCM items. And your third question, will existing projects be submitted? I think the same item cannot receive two subsidies, but the same team, if they take their research results and conduct new research, and that will be acceptable. Thank you, Mr. Ma. Next, Mr. Michael Tian. Life sciences theme, converting basic research and technology transfer. That would include upstream, midstream, and downstream. So we need collaboration to see results. But you will include gene therapy, cell therapy, vaccine development, and so on. So if your pharmaceutical research includes different medicines, what kind of results are you expecting? If you want to cover upstream, midstream, and downstream over a number of years, well, it's hard to achieve some breakthrough at the global level. So we need to be focused. We need to focus on some projects that can achieve world-class results and achieve IPs and patents. Is that possible? Otherwise, I think you might achieve some results, but the market for those results would be very small, or there would be nothing special achieved. And then, secondly, I have a question about the use of public funds. In paragraph 10, you say that there can be a suspension of the subsidies, and unless there is, you will also pursue fraudulent applications and so on. So previously it was also asked, these questions were asked, and it seems that it is hard to recover unless there is fraud. So if they have committed some effort, but there are no results, I can understand that. But then if they conduct work over 10 years and there's no performance or no results, and then if they do not focus on life sciences, you say that the government can recover these subsidies. So you must have means to recover these funds. So are you sure? And if the funds were not used in those areas, is it possible to identify where the funds were consumed, and can you recover these funds? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Tian, for two questions. Your first question, your question was about the focus, and this is exactly why we set up this Life Sciences Institute subsidy plan. The government has been committing funds over the years, but they were diverse. We have some significant achievements, and It is now time for Hong Kong to take the old resources and consolidate. We want to achieve critical mass. We want to have a further commitment of our resources and achieve some world-class breakthrough. So that is the primary purpose of our current plan. So that is our starting point. And we want to consolidate Hong Kong's basic research, especially in life sciences, and we want to be world-class in a few areas.
欺诈，我建议我们不用欺。
When it comes to the recovery of the fund, I suggest not using the word fraud. Universities in Hong Kong are public organizations. All along, universities have outcomes. 5 universities in Hong Kong are among the top 70 in the world. That is because we have good research outcomes, we have good research results. So we'd like to leverage the platform of Life and Health Technology Research Institute in order to promote the research results to the international arena. We are confident there will be success, but then whether they are phenomenal or not, we don't start from scratch. There have been good results, so we are fully confident in the research teams. Regarding the amount that we can recover, they have annual reports, there are new R&D outcomes, there are also patent. So we are moving forward. So we don't need to recover the cost. The only scenario in which we'll recover the cost is mismanagement. We want to devote resources to the Life and Health Technology Research Institute. We are fully confident in local universities, so I hope Mr. Michael Tim will also place his trust in local universities. Well, just one more point. You agree with focus in your first remark, but I am afraid that you will require upstream, midstream, and downstream as well. So can you allow the Research Institute to work on one of the stages, so not just from scratch, from upstream all the way to downstream? I agree with Mr. Michael Tin. I'd like to say the Research Institute focuses on the upstream, but it does not mean that we do not pay any regard to midstream and downstream. I agree with you, Mr. Michael Tin. We do focus on a couple of major areas, but good research needs to come with good applicability scope. It needs to have a wide scope of applicability. Dr. So Chang Wang. Ms. Lam Chun Seng and Ms. Dari Lee mentioned Hong Kong has been investing heavily in innovation and technology, so we pin very high hopes on this area. Professor Sun gave a very good answer. For each funding, they have different foci. Some focus on upstream, some on midstream, some on downstream. Research has their own target. Let me go back to the main point. I read the papers and I also listened to Professor Sun. The Research Institute focuses on upstream. It aims at achieving breakthroughs. So I'd like to ask Professor Sun, when it comes to life and health technology, as I heard, Hong Kong has been leading. It has been holding a leading role. So it does have a strong foundation. The research ecology is quite good as well. So why don't you focus on the institutes to help targeted research institutes to give them funding, such as bringing experts to some subjects. In paragraphs 11 and 18, it's like starting from scratch, building a brand new research institute. Just now, Secretary, you also said that research work at university is not insufficient. There is actually a great deal of research work. The key lies in the system. For some subjects, there are good R&D outcomes, but without a policy, we can hardly go anywhere. So can we improve the system? Why do we have to set up a new research institute? If we're going to set up a new research institute, will it be at odds with the original or the existing ecology? Will it be unfair? Just now, Professor Sun, you said that you need to drive the development of upstream with robust midstream and downstream developments. That's a very professional thought. In Hong Kong, midstream and downstream developments are not very robust. So is it possible to combine upstream and midstream? Can we do this? Thank you. So questions on 3 fronts. The reason why we need to set up a brand new research institute, will the INT ecology be affected, and so on. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. So, for your support. Like Dr. So said, we would like to create a good ecology. As I said, we are building an INT system. In this system, the upstream plays a pivotal role. Hong Kong has a very good traditional research foundation. We have good basic research capabilities. Starting a research institute is not like building something new. For example, when we have good basic research, but different institutes are working on their own. As Mr. Michael Tien mentioned, we want to bring together institutes. We can converge and achieve critical mass. That's how we can make breakthroughs with the valuable resources in Hong Kong. So that does not cause any impact on the existing ecology in Hong Kong. In case there is any change, I do think it is a positive change. The government is actually going to invest more into the system, so there won't be any negative impact on the INT ecology. There will only be positive impact on the ecology. Research Institute focuses on the upstream, but we do not forget the transformation and commercialization in the midstream and downstream. For example, the Race Plus scheme. If it weren't for upstream, we wouldn't have good commercialization outcomes in midstream and downstream. It's about the entire ecological system of INT. Once again, thank you, Dr. So. Next, Dr. Hui Simon Lee. Thank you, Chairman. The subsidy program, the funding program to set up Life and Health Research Institute are supported. Setting aside $6 billion for setting up 3 Life and Health Technology Research Institutes, I'd like to express my views. The administration said that It is not a must to have all 3 institutes. $6 billion for a period of 10 years, even if we only have 1 institute, say $400 to $600 million per year. So I'm kind of worried whether the funding amount is sufficient. Is it sufficient to last the institute for 10 years of operation? If it's not sufficient, when the time comes, will you apply to the Legislative Council for funding once again? As you said, we are building an ecology. What we lack in Hong Kong is the transformation and commercialization of R&D outcomes. So quite many scientists find it difficult to commercialize their R&D outcomes, and that's why they have already left Hong Kong. In this area, certification, pharmaceuticals, and so on. Under this scheme, is there any special measures to optimize the commercialization process? Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Hui Simon Lee. I'd like to ask Ms. Carrie Chang to give you a reply regarding the amount. We have already taken into account the arrangements for different schemes. The Financial Secretariat has earmarked $10 billion to support life and health technology. We have planned to set aside $6 billion for this area, which is quite a substantial amount. Of course, it's going to be dispersed in 10 years. One important element of the design is that the ratio is 4:1. So we do request universities or institutes to seek support from the industry. There will be both in-kind support and non-in-kind support. So we think the amount is appropriate. The second question, I agree with Dr. Hui Simon Lee's concerns. I agree with his points regarding the I&T ecology and commercialization of R&D outcomes. Top-notch university research teams, if they want to cause an impact on society, they need to have good research and commercialization of R&D outcomes in order to have an impact on society. Research needs to be linked to the applicability of life and health technology. We need to have good pharmaceuticals. We need to have good treatment plans. Without clinical application, how can we realize the potential of the research outcomes? In the midstream, we do have relevant funding, say Race Plus program. So we are attaching great importance to the integration among the upstream, midstream, and downstream. I once again thank Dr. Hui Simon Lee for your support. Next, Dr. Wendy Hong. Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, I speak in support of the program. In the panel meeting, I had concerns about the program. I thought we had good upstream, whereas the midstream and downstream capabilities were kind of weak. Professor Sun called me and laid my concerns. Just now, when the Secretary was answering members' questions, he also reiterated these points once again. Life and Health Technology Research Institutes focuses on the transformation and commercialization of R&D outcomes. Inno Hong Kong has a total of 14 research centers. All of them are related to medicine and technology. They promote international scientific collaboration. There are also innovative life and health research centers in Hong Kong Shenzhen Science and Technology Park. I'd like to know the division of work among these institutes. Next, in the papers, it says that $6 billion would be earmarked for setting up at most 3 research institutes. If there are more applications than 3, and when the assessment committee thinks it more than 3 has potential, so how will you deal with it? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Hong. The purpose of the Life Sciences Institute, I think I've already given an explanation. So, Hong Kong is different. It is project-based. For example, if we have a local university and there's a cooperation with an overseas institute, so the research direction, the 2 universities will have to discuss amongst themselves. It is less than 100 million per year, and this situation is like an extra large project, but we're now focused on Hong Kong. We have a few areas where there might be breakthroughs, and we want to have multidisciplinary cooperation amongst local universities. For example, in gene therapy, we want the universities to work together. Let's say this school works in new materials, and they can focus on that particular area. Of course, Life Sciences Institute in the Loop area, we will encourage research centers. Well, it doesn't mean setting up something new. The only thing we might establish is in the Loop, setting up a national level laboratory or research center. And it will focus on life sciences, and its basis, a national laboratory, it needs a lot of infrastructure, and we don't rule out the Life Science Institute. So in the future, we might have a high-level Hong Kong Life Science Research Center. So we won't rule that out. Regarding numbers, we won't exceed 3 institutes. Now, if the universities, if there are more than 3 seeking an application, so the government will have to coordinate these applications. And of course, we will comply with the LegCo requirement. We won't exceed 3 institutes. Next, Mr. Edmund Wong. In the industry panel, I had expressed my support of this scheme. So the government committing more to R&D is very important. And in the panel, I had said that the funding will be handed out in phases. I was concerned if we were going to provide the funds in phases, it might affect the research pace. So I would like to clarify what items would be, what funds would be released in one go and what kinds of funds would be released in phases. So if the progress is slow, will the government suspend the funding? And how will the government decide whether to continue the funding? The second question is about monitoring. So the successful applicant needs to set up the Life Science Institute, and it has to have a form of governance that is endorsed by the government. Now, I understand this approach, but we now see a lot of university governance that is controversial. So when problems arise, does the government have any ability to intervene to ensure that our public funds are well spent. Once again, I have to thank Mr. Wong for his support. The first question was about funding. I'll have my colleague take up the question. I can assure Mr. Wong that the funding mode will not affect the running of the institute. We will consider their application and provide funding in advance. For example, we can have funding 2 times a year. And if you look at the cash flow forecast, if we anticipate in the initial years they might need more investment, they need to update some laboratories, they need to procure advanced equipment and so on. So if they have that timetable in their proposal, we can align our funding with their needs and provide funding in advance so that they can commence their work. So if the research proceeds smoothly, if it goes smooth, then they can start the next phase of work. They can adjust their cash flow. We can meet their demands. If they are delayed, we can also hold back the funding. So this is an interactive process, and the disbursement of funds will match their R&D speed. The second question was about monitoring. I'll have Ms. Chang respond. Regarding the framework, our design is to have a governing structure in the institute, and on the government side we have a secretariat, we have a steering committee. So if problems arise in the institute, we have sufficient space for intervention. We can help coordinate problems that arise. I want to follow up with, I need a positive confirmation that the government has a clause that allows the government to intervene the government with the governance, because you say you have a steering committee, but if we don't have the authority to intervene, we need to be authorized or have the authority to intervene. Regarding the use of public funds, the government can intervene to ensure money is well spent according to agreed upon terms. That's definitely the case. Now, I need to indicate that we still have 6 colleagues. So members who wish to speak, please indicate as soon as possible. Mr. Dominic Lee, this Life Science Institute, it has great potential, so setting up the Life Science Institute subsidy plan can support R&D, laboratory, clinical trials, can cultivate talent, so it deserves support. So I do note that the paper has highlighted some extreme cases where when they need to activate an exit clause. Do we have any definition for that? So in the exit mechanism, what measures are there? How will the residual funds be handled? How will how will the IP ownership be delegated, and so on. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for the question. I'll have my colleague, Mr. Lee. So, in case the work of the Institute doesn't meet our expectations, well, we require each institute to have a board of directors. It has independent directors and a scientific committee. Every year, they need to provide progress reports, and they also need audited financial reports. When we sign the funding agreement with them, there are some KPIs established. For example, the number of IP applications. I understand. I am concerned about the exit clauses. So let's say they don't meet standards. There's a discussion process. They need to explain where in the short term they can catch up. But if they really do a poor job, we will discuss with the steering committee, and the steering committee will come to a decision. So it has to depend on the steering committee. We don't have specific rules or regulations. Well, they need to submit reports on a regular basis. They need to submit financial reports. So if they don't meet our expectations, is there any guideline? Do they have to fall behind on each report, or 80% or 60%? So what do you mean? When do you start to recover funds? It will have to depend on the nature of the shortfall. Let's say if you're talking about published papers. Now, if they do have a pledge to follow up, it would have to depend on each individual case. So what about the recovery of funds and IP? So as we explained just now, our current practice is to disperse the funds in phases. We will examine the reports and financial data before we release the next phase of funds. So if they need to terminate the contract, we will not provide the next phase of funding. Now, regarding past funding, did they really conduct R&D? Has there been any fraudulent behavior? It will depend on each case. Ms. Yong Hoyan, I support this item, especially we see that the government has a clear direction. So I support the $6 billion funding plan. It is a long-term subsidy for universities, so we expect the universities and institutes to engage for 10 years at least. So we heard about how the steering committee will monitor the progress and how the funds would be released. So we need some clear direction and clear KPIs, because I believe you'll be signing a contract with them. You'll have a contract with the institute and universities. So how will they be assessed? Because not every project will last 10 years. So how will their work be assessed? And I believe each institute will have their own resources for R&D. So in the future, this institute, will they be competing with the universities? How? I believe this institute will be focusing on life sciences. So how will you attract all the Hong Kong medical schools to submit their research to the institute, and how will they want to keep their research within the school's walls? And if there's more competition, they might worry that there might be more flexibility within their own university. There won't be any extra work. So I want to understand how the relationship will work and how you conduct the monitoring.
Questions on two fronts. Thank you, Secretary. When it comes to assessment, I believe Mr. Ivan Lee has already answered some of the questions. I'd like to focus on the second question of Ms. Eunice Yong. The research institute is built by the government and university. It's built upon the strength of university. It's not the case that we are going to build a brand new research institute which departs from universities. We simply want to draw reference from other countries. These research institutes are actually going to be within university that will pull the resources together, and there will also be cross-university or institutional collaboration. I have to emphasize the application is institution-based. Mr. Ivan Lee has already detailed assessment issues. The research institute is co-developed and managed by university and the government. Universities need to make sure that the research can go forward, can go further. The strongest research team and projects have good track record, they have good R&D outcomes. With new resources, they need to make enhancements, and I am confident in them. For future R&D outcomes in IP, intellectual property, you will sign agreements with the institutions on the projects. 70% is on the research teams. Universities used to own the IP in the past, but right now the IP will be in the name of research institutes. So how can you attract more institutions or scholars to join the research institute? We need a long time before we can realize IP. There are many different kinds of IP materializing every year. The research institute is attached to universities. It's basically within university. Research teams or inventors should be entitled to no less than 70% of the IP benefits. No more than 30% will belong to institutions or universities. Under this mechanism, I believe many research teams are willing to commercialize R&D outcomes in Hong Kong. I once again thank Ms. Eunice Yong for your support. Next, Dr. Chow Man Kong. Thank you, Chairman. This project is worthy of our support. Even though we're going to spend $6 billion in one go, covering three main themes, that is $2 billion per theme. To better understand this project, 2 weeks ago, I went to Guangzhou to conduct a visit. Some 200 related enterprises were in Guangzhou. Some were pharmaceutical testing enterprises from university. They used to be attached to universities, but then after development they are conducting countrywide or nationwide pharmaceutical testing or certification. This is a much needed industry in Hong Kong as well. If you require 10 years of operation before they can obtain funding, probably you need to give them milestones or KPIs. That is when they are on a self-financing basis, then you need to set out the targets clearly. So you don't just give the project $2 billion per 10 years, averaging $200 million per year. But if afterwards you find that they are not as impressive, then the resources will go down the drain. Member mentioned knowledge transfer. Researchers play a pivotal role. Will we consider setting out clearly in the assessment criteria that you will hold more courses to groom more talents in this connection? Even if we have good infrastructures, but if we lack talents, if we only rely on importing labor from elsewhere, that is not sufficient, so probably we can work on this front. Talent asked for the first time for hardware, actually asked a couple of times already. I thank Dr. Chow for your support. I also thank Chairman. For the first question about the KPI, we have already added KPIs. There are conditions, number of knowledge transfer, number of enterprises, sponsor from the industry. All these are KPIs or indicators. I'd like to emphasize world-class research outcomes, strong upstream. All these are very important to the development of university and the International INT Center. We may focus on the value of the R&D outcomes, but a good research institute must have good upstream and midstream capabilities. Hong Kong has a total of 5 universities among the top 70 in the world. We do want to have synergy as well. Next on courses, they are not involved in this application, but we need to have a platform, a cross-disciplinary platform for postgraduates to further develop and conduct research. They need to have funding, they need to have good equipment, they need to be able to go to different places around the world for exchange. All these projects are inextricably linked to the grooming of talents. Thousands of people can benefit from the program. Most of them are postgraduates. Postgraduates or researchers. Thank you, Chairman. Those who would like to speak, please come to the conference room as soon as possible. If no members would like to speak, then we'll proceed to a vote after the 3 members have finished speaking. Mr. Peter Schill. Thank you, Chairman. I definitely support setting aside $6 billion for the setup of the Life and Health Technology Research Institute. In a panel meeting, I also supported it and I asked quite some questions. We have many national targets. New quality productive forces are on the list. I believe all members will also support this project. I asked quite many questions in the panel meeting. Many members have already asked my questions, and I don't want to repeat my questions. I'd like to ask Professor Sun, for the finance committees in these couple of weeks, we have approved tens of billions of dollars to ITIB. We didn't approve as much funding as we did in the previous year when it comes to INT. We basically support all the projects. All the projects were recommended by Professor Sun, and we supported it. We supported all these projects. Just now, Dr. Chow mentioned 10 years. That is, the entire activity might take over 10 years. Other events may take 3 to 5 years. So how can you make sure these events could be implemented according to schedule successfully? You assumed office on the 1st of July in 2022, so you are still 3 years away. So will you run for the will you be the secretary again in the next term of the government? Well, that's a policy discussion. It's not about financial arrangements or implications. Professor Sun, there were a couple of different INT projects. All of them were supported by electrical members. I'm indeed touched. Well, we support you. INT is actually not easy to develop INT in Hong Kong. We need to build infrastructures. We need to create a good ecology. Government support from electrical members. All of your support is very important. Well, excuse me, Secretary.
局長，我諗講唔到嘢㗎啦。單地補充就得㗎啦。
Anything to add? Next member, Reverend Peter Kuhn. Chairman, definitely I support the project. I have a question though. Just now, member asked a question about IP, 30% to university. That is some 70% to research teams or inventors. Will it be on the rather high side? I understand we need to attract talents, but then if the researchers have remuneration, but they also have IP benefits, is it possible to reduce the ratio to say 40% or 50%? Professor Sun, thank you, Reverend Peter Cohen, for your question. 70% is not on the high side. We have already deliberated on the figure. It used to be 3 to 7. 7 university or schools, 3 for research teams. If we do not commercialize the R&D outcomes, then we'll come to nothing in the end. The ratio of 7 to 3 brings us up to par with Shenzhen and other counterparts. The commercialization of R&D outcomes may change eventually. There will be new input. It remains uncertain how much researchers can obtain, but the key is that we are going forward. Just now, Mr. Peter Xu was asking how to make sure we will succeed. But we need to take a step-by-step approach. Every year, we are taking steps, and we will see results in different phases. We don't see success overnight. So the industry will definitely work harder with the government. Mr. Benson-Lok, after you ask questions, we'll proceed to a vote. Well, we can see the Secretary is very emotional. So apart from ideas, emotions also count. So I support the setup of Life and Health Research Institute funded by $6 billion. I believe we are taking a leading role compared with our competitors. International collaboration is an essential element in the application. I believe this is in line with the government strategy to attract global talents. I have 2 questions. In paragraph 19 of the papers, the standing and reputation of the scholars and scientists involved, in particular those from outside Hong Kong, these will be given advantage. Some applications invite top-notch scholars or experts, but they play the role of advisors. We don't know actually if they are really taking part in the research. Probably their name is simply attached to the application. So how can we make sure these top-notch scholars or scientists will take part in the projects? Say, for example, do we require these scholars to stay in Hong Kong to implement the project? Then we can attract talents. Thank you.
Second question, D and E, sustainable development and research outcome. The research needs to be commercialized, and I see there are three types of people: the academics, the industry, and government officials. So will you consider adding banking sector or industry or those who are familiar with fundraising so we can help the commercialization of these research outcomes? So we have two questions. It's been answered once, but it's asked from a different perspective. Thank you, Chairman. I said just now that Hong Kong is not starting from zero, but we are starting a new chapter in our research. So it includes upstream, midstream, downstream, and so on. And in the process, there are different ideas put forward. So that's why we have made a lot of applications for funding. So we also expect to see more funding requests in the coming years. Now, regarding the honorable member's question about non-local staff, we are building a platform to consolidate local talent, but we would like to attract the leading scientists. So we have focused on attracting leading scientists. So are they just staying a few days, or are they here for the long term? And during my career in the university, I can tell you we are now taking a more open approach. Some leading scientists, they might not be able to forfeit their existing career, but over time, they will be able to stay. For example, Yang Zhenying started as a visiting scholar, but over time, he became a full-time professor, and ultimately, he took up a position in Tsinghua University. So we need an open attitude. We should allow flexibility, and we also, but most importantly, we want to maintain cooperation with leading universities and scientists. So even if they stay overseas, they can still maintain close contact with Hong Kong. Now, regarding your second question, we totally agree. In the future, we can work with the steering committee and include more, we can invite more financial experts. Now, if we don't have any extra questions, I'll take FCR 2024-25-12 and put it to the vote. Those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those against, please raise your hand. No votes against. So I believe members are in favor of this item, and I announce that it has been endorsed. I'd like to remind you that the next meeting will be on the 14th of June, and meeting adjourned. Thank you.